Okay, I've just got to the end of my ground looping for the switches and realised that I made a mistake because I forgot to allow a tail for these grounds. But it's not too much of an issue because with the use of the multimeter, I found that this pin and this pin are actually linked, and this pin and this pin are linked as well. So all I can do is run another tail from this pin and link it into this circuit board here. Crisis averted. My missing switch has finally turned up for my auto throttle, so I have now installed that under this mess of wires and finished wiring it up. From the last segment, you'll know that I left a couple of ground cables not connected to anything, and that was for this switch and the 3 LEDs, one each side for when the flight director's on, and one for the auto throttle light, which is here. You can see that from the front. So there's the lights for the flight director, and there's the auto throttle arm LED in there. Something else I've done at this stage, I've got these screws here. There's 1, 2, 3, just temporarily holding these 3 front plates together. They need to be painted grey. So what I've done is the nuts on the back, if you can see in there's a little M3 nut. I've put the screw in, put the nut on, and then I've super glued the nut to the plate so that when I take the screw out, the nut stays in place. So at a later stage I can take the silver screw out and swap it for one that I've painted, and hopefully, fingers crossed, the nut will stay there. There's 5 of these screws in total. I've only got 3 holding it at the moment, but in total there's 5. No, I tell a lie, I have put all 5 in because I've had to glue the nuts. Sorry about that. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So that's now all the wiring finished off. You can see now that I've got my auto throttle switch, I've fitted the encoder, and that's super glued and hot glued into place in here. So from the front it looks fine. The hardest job I had on that was actually getting this roller on the encoder straight, so that when you roll it, it rolls straight, otherwise it wobbles about. So that took a little bit of time in adjusting and filing and whatever to get the hole straight enough for this to roll straight. I have to point out a mistake that I made. You can see that I've got one button that sticks up further than the rest, and that is simply because somehow I didn't manage to push the switch all the way down in my backplate properly when it glued. There's absolutely nothing I can do about it now. I've tried all I can to get in there to get it to sit down flat, but that's a stupid mistake on my part. It's not horrendous from the front, it just sticks out slightly further than the rest. So I will just have to live with that, I'm afraid. So that's that panel finished. The next part I've done is fitted the wires on the back of this circuit board for the dual encoder with the position switch for the bank select, and I've also fitted 2 LED warm white backlighting strips. And as you take it off the reel, it starts with one of these plugs. So this is the plug that's going to run all the backlighting for the MCP, the 2 ephes and the main instrument panel. I would have liked this really to be on the main instrument panel rather than the MCP, but there you go. I'm starting my backlighting with the MCP, so I'll just have to live with that again. So I think I've run a strip along the very top, which if I get the front panel is going to coincide with this writing along the very top here. You'll notice that there's hardly any writing along the bottom, so I haven't run a strip along the bottom. I've just run a second strip sort of 3/4 of the way down. And the reason these wires are looped is because the wheel of the vertical speed sticks through this plate, so I've had to loop the wires to make sure they don't interfere. So with these backlighting strips, you get cut lines sort of every 2 inches or so. So what I've done is where I've got to the end, I've done a cut, and then I've just soldered 2 wires and looped it round to the start of the next one, and then just a bit of hot glue over it to A, insulate it, and B, to keep it secure so that the wires don't get pulled. So that's all I've done there, and then I've just created a open-ended extension that will eventually wire onto the ephes backlighting, and then from there it will probably wire to the other ephes, and then from there to the main panel. So I've tested this and it all works fine, and I think it's going to light the main panel absolutely fine. It doesn't appear to be any dark spots anywhere. So next job is for me to now mount that plate on there and sort the mess of wires out. What I've excuse me. What I've done is these cutouts were originally for where the 7-segment displays go. Because I wanted my backlighting to run along the very top, what I've done is I've drilled a hole underneath every one of these cutouts for the 7 segments, so that when I connect all my wires to these pins, I can bring the wires through them holes. And that way it's not going to interfere with the backlighting. That's the plan anyway. But I know this bit's going to be tedious, to try and get all the wires to come through the holes where they should, and to keep it as neat as possible. And the plan is to then mount these on there like that. And then I shall cut the wires to length and solder them directly onto into the holes where we desoldered the pins from. It's at this stage that I now need to decide what interface I'm going to use. I'm now leaning towards SimVim, just because of the simplicity of it. If you look at SimVim's site, all you've really got to do is click on the picture of the button you want to interface and tell it what pin you've wired it to, and that's it. There's no what's the word, scripting. There's no scripting involved whatsoever. It's just such a simple way of interfacing, and Vlad is very helpful. If you've got a question, he's always on hand to answer. It's kind of a funny time for me to be wiring stuff up because with Flight Sim 2020, just don't know at this stage who's gonna move across to Flight Sim and who's gonna stay with X-Plane, or whatever sim you're using. So it's kind of a what do I do situation, but I'm deciding to push on, and if I have to change things in the future. 2020 is going to be, although it comes out in November, I think it's going to be a good 6 months to a year before we start getting decent add-ons and people moving their software across, such as SimVim, MobiFlight, whoever you use, Air Manager. So I don't know if I really want to wait that long. I want to be pushing on with my sim. So I'm just going to choose a direction and I'm going to go with it. And if I have to change it in future, then, I'll worry about that at the time. But with SimVim, you can only use one Arduino. That's sort of the only thing that's put me off so long, because I kind of wanted an Arduino mounted in each different part of the sim, so maybe a couple of Arduinos in the pedestal, a couple on the main instrument panel, and a couple in the glare shield. But what I've done is a lot of reading on SimVim, and if you look there is a lot of information. I haven't played with this yet, but I think this is what I'm going to use. And what that allows you to do is have 16 switches or LEDs running off of one Arduino pin. So what I plan to do is, I haven't totted up how many I'm going to need, but there'll be one there for the LEDs and possibly two for the switches. So that will mean 3 pins of the Arduino. Yeah, I'm still kind of reading about it, but I'm just trying to tell you what my thinking is at this stage. It may well change when I actually come to wiring it up. I need to do a bit of experimenting. But the main sort of next job really is to get this mounted on here and get the wires coming out where they need to be. And then I'll come back to you then and see where we are with what I'm going to use, whether it's how many of these and how we're going to go from there. I know I've still got to add a ton more wires because I need to add about 10 wires per display. So I'm hoping that there's going to be enough room once I get this on to be able to get in there and solder them up. Or plan B is I get this plate fitted and then I can push the displays out, wire them up, and then slot them back in again before I then fix them permanently. And plan C, should those two fail, is to take all this apart again and wire them all up first. But I think plan A or B should be okay. Fingers crossed. Okay, so who spotted my mistake before I did? where I've looped the backlighting wires, I've actually looped them towards the wheel. Hang on, let me try and make it a little bit clearer. You see these two looped wires here? Yeah, well, I've looped them towards the wheel. I think I'm gonna have to change it so they loop like that. I tell you, when you get into building one of these, there's so much forward thinking, and sometimes the simplest of tasks, you make a complete hash of. It's not too bad. I can just go back and unsolder them and make some longer loops and do it again, and this time do it right. Okay, I thought I'd just give you a quick preview while I'm checking it for myself, how it looks when it's all backlit. What I've done is from the last segment, I've just pulled the cables through the back plate just to tidy them up. So the cables have more or less got a straight run through the back plate from the switch or LED that it's mounted to. And the reason I've tried to do that is to keep any cables from running in front of the backlighting to avoid creating any shadow areas. And you can see that the backlighting is not got any dim or shadowed area at all. I don't know how well this is going to show up on camera. The reason it's so bright here is because there's obviously no knob on there, so it's shining straight through there. A couple of things this has taught me I need to do. You can see just here the MA light, which comes on with your flight director, is currently showing white. So what I need to do is, where I've hot glued that in place, I need to paint the hot glue black so it doesn't let any of the white light through. And same on the other side. And now the autofocus is going to mess about. And also here you can see on the camera it looks like it's glowing white, but it's actually glowing green. So it looks like the green LED is on when the backlighting's on. So again, on the back I need to paint the hot glue that's holding that LED in black, so it doesn't allow any white light to shine through the LED. But apart from that, I'm really happy. I think it's looking good. Can see a little bit of just a tiny bit of light bleed coming along the bottom of where the screens are, but not forgetting that they're not fixed in place yet. And you can see actually the backlighting the bleed has just disappeared when I've pushed that screen right in where it should be. But also, I mean, they're going to be lit up white anyway, because they're white 7-segment displays, so I can't see that being a problem. Okay, today I taught myself a lesson to read instructions properly. My plan was to use these with SimVim, but I thought these could control LEDs as well as buttons. It turns out they can't. So my idea of using them for the LEDs, the ones I've wired 2 up here. They're fine for the buttons, but thankfully I hadn't started wiring it to the LEDs, and I thought I'd better double check, and I'm glad I did. SimVim uses the I think they call it a DM13. Just bear with me a second. I'll grab it off my breadboard. One of the options is to use one of these, and you can run 16 LED outputs off of one of these, and you can also chain 4 of them together for a total of 64 LEDs off of one Arduino pin. The problem with that now is that because I've wired it effectively as common cathode, in that I've linked all my grounds together and the anodes are on these yellow wires. These use a common anode. So what I should have done is wired all the positives of my LEDs together in a chain and left the grounds on the wires sticking out. So I now can't use this either, so it's not been a good day. Another way that's in Vim, you can use these serial matrix boards, but what I've now decided to do is leave my buttons controlled via SimVim, and what I'm going to do is use another Arduino with my breakout board on the top, my screw terminal board, and I'm going to run the LEDs via Air Manager. So buttons and displays will be with SimVim, and the LEDs will be via Air Manager. So not the ideal solution, and I think probably to make full use of all these pins, I may well wire both the ethos into this and control that via Air Manager as well. So that is the new plan, and it has taught me to make sure to read everything twice before I start doing any wiring. But yeah, there's a way around it, so it's not too much of an issue. It's just more of an inconvenience. So now that I know what I'm doing with regards to wiring, I can now show you up close the wiring into these 16 channel multiplexers that I'm using with SimVim. So basically 0 to 15 along the bottom there is all my switch wires, well 16 of them my switch wires, and the holes along the top are what go to the Arduino being managed by SimVim. And what I'm doing as I'm going along is just keeping a reference to myself, so when it comes to interfacing it, I know what's connected to what. So just to explain it, this one here is the top one, so that's going to be plugged into pin 2 on the Arduino. That's just a reference to me of what it is for the MCP. It's going to be multiplex and 0, and then here 0 to 15 is what's connected to it. And again, for the other multiplexer is connected to Arduino pin 3 MCP. It's multiplexer number 1, and it's for buttons. Same here, that's for buttons. and again what's connected to it. So when I come to interfacing it, it's all laid out in front of me. I know what to do, and that'll save a lot of messing about. On this side I've done a little sketch just so I don't have to keep referring to the Synvin page. This was where I've put outputs here. This was originally where I thought it could control LEDs before I found out that it can't. So outputs actually refers to 7-segment displays. I'm still a bit confused about this, because to me, if it can control a 7-segment, why can't it control an LED? But there you go. I've read through it a few times, and that's my understanding. If anybody knows any different, well, to be honest, it'll probably be too late to let me know, because by the time you watch this, I will have long gone past this stage. But obviously this is my 16 switches that will be wired along this side, and then the signal goes to the pin on my Arduino, which currently I'm using pins 2 and 3. So say for instance this is wired to 2. The next 4 are the address pins, so they always go to pin 22, 23, 24 and 25 on the Arduino. Plus 5 volts and ground. This one here, the EN, is not used for inputs, it's used on this side for outputs. And on outputs, the EN goes to the pin instead of the signal on the input side. And the difference is that the signal wire goes to pin 26 on the Arduino when you're using it as an output. Clear as mud? Good. I'm now about to start prepping my LED wires ready to hook up to the Arduino and Air Manager. What I've got to do is put a 100 ohm resistor in line for every LED. So basically I'll just have to snip the cable, put the LED in line and then heat shrink over it before it's wired to the Arduino. So lots of them to do.